Alright, take two. Alright, so my dyslexia got the better of me just then. So, I'm going to restart this book. This is Great Philosophers Who Failed at Love by Andrew Shaffer. So, I know it's completely different from the Goosebumps that I have recorded. I want to kind of bounce back and forth between some Goosebumps and stuff like that to some deeper stuff and some more intellectual stuff. Also, I wanted to start my channel on the basis that happily ever after isn't always the case, right? If we're gonna be telling stories, let's be honest about these stories. And so, I felt like this was a great book, The Great Philosophers Who Failed at Love. This is like reality ever after, for people. Like the thing about philosophers is that they spend so long, and I say this as one myself, but philosophers in general will study life, study it so intrinsically, all the ins and outs, and get to the bottom of it all, just to find at the end that they didn't live at all, they just studied living, and I feel like this is kind of a book that kind of brings that into perspective for us, and the importance of living, right? So, without further ado, I will get started with the great philosophers who failed at love. Let's start with this introduction. All right. It's always nice to know that no matter how badly you've screwed up your love life, someone else has done far, far worse. Neil Pollack. We all have questions about love. We all want to know the secrets to a successful relationship. Is she the one? Is it okay to date my boss? How do I know if my husband is cheating? It seems intuitive that we should look to wise men and women for the answers. Philosophers have contemplated the most vexing questions, from ethics to politics to the very nature of being. If anyone can teach us about a concept as abstract as love, philosophers, the original lovers of wisdom, should be at the top of the list. But a lover of wisdom and a wise lover are, as it turns out, two very different things. While most of us have struck out at love before, the tales of many philosophers' romantic hardships and indiscretions take the wedding cake. You might have forgotten an anniversary, but at least you didn't strangle your wife, Louise Althusser. Althusser? Pretty sure I'm saying that wrong. Althusser? Whatever. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, in the comments. Adopt your mistress as your daughter, Jean-Paul Sartre, or get exiled to another country for having an affair, Seneca the Younger, quite the stoic. The great Western philosophers, the men and women whose intellectual acrobatics are praised by professors in philosophy 101 courses everywhere, have consistently sabotaged their own relationships with their neurotic tendencies, in or out of love. Philosophers are overly critical, condescending, and holier than thou. As a philosopher, that's facts. And their theories are impenetrable, duh. Their positions contradictory, sometimes. Their probing questions a nuisance, true. Such temperamental behavior has made philosophers unsuitable candidates for marriage. It is not surprising that so many philosophers simply opted out of the love game altogether. While far too many philosophers died miserable, bitter, and alone, a few did make it through their failures to have happy marriages, like Albert Camus, whose life was cut short by a tragic car accident before his wife could discover the mistresses that he had hidden around the globe. Or Henry Ward Beecher, the infamous 19th century adulterer whose wife was too busy raising their 10 children to even give a thought to divorcing him. Or Bertrand Russell, who found that, at least when it comes to matrimony, the fourth time is a charm. The truth is that this book contains just a sampling of the thousands of great minds who have failed at love in every era of history. Big brains and broken hearts have gone hand in hand, and the bigger they come, the harder they fall. Perhaps Bob Dylan was the wisest of all when he admitted, you can't be in love and wise at the same time. Alright, Peter Abelard. Alright, so from 1079 to 1142, that was his lifespan. Alright, he looked kind of like a pimp. Alright, gotta give him that. He said, let no lover hereafter follow my example, for a woman rejected is an outrageous creature. So, let's find out why he said that. By his own estimation, French scholar Peter Abelard confounded all the learned of the age. Sorry, fucked that up hard. With his philosophical musings, at the height of his fame, after defeating his teachers in logical arguments and founding his own school, Abelard accepted the chair of Notre Dame Cathedral School in Paris in 1115. His lectures on Greek philosophy and Christian theology drew thousands of students. But 17-year-old Heloise, she over here, D'Argentrul, okay, I'm pretty sure I said that right. I'm certain I did. Okay, stood out from the crowd. I saw her, I loved her, I resolved to make her love me. Abelard reflected in his autobiography. Heloise lived with her uncle Fulbert, a canon of the cathedral, not a man to be trifled with. This presented only a minor challenge for Abelard, who devised a plan to steal Heloise out from under the canon's watchful eye. I was ambitious in my choice of lady, and wished to find some obstacles that I might surmount them with the greater glory and pleasure. Abelard wrote, he befriended Fulbert through mutual acquaintance, and in a stroke of luck, Fulbert hired him to educate Heloise in philosophy. Can you believe it? He allowed me the privilege of his table and an apartment in his house, and by this means I found opportunities of being in private with her. Abelard wrote, clearly pleased with himself. Heloise fell in love with her mentor, who was over twice her age. Their private tutoring sessions quickly degenerated into lessons of the flesh. Fleshens. Soon their love couldn't be contained to daylight hours, and they had to secretly meet at night to express mutual affections. As one of Abelard's contemporaries put it bluntly, the learned professor taught her not to argue, but to fornicate. Rumors of Abelard and Heloise's affair spread throughout Paris, eventually circling back to Fulbert's ears. The enraged uncle tossed the professor out of his home and onto the street, just like this. He was like, you son of a bitch. And, yeah. Abelard refused to abandon his young lover. After renting an apartment near Fulbert's house, he met with Heloise's maid, Agaton. I'm pretty sure that I'm saying that right. Okay, that one I'm pretty sure I'm actually right about. He asked her to be an intermediary between himself and Heloise. Unfortunately for Abelard, the maid had her own feelings for him. I am in love with you, Abelard. I know you adore Heloise, and I do not blame you. I desire only to enjoy the second place in your affections. Do not perplex yourself with scruples. A prudent man should love several at the same time. Then if one should fail, he is not left unprovided. Disagree. But whatever. Sounds like a sensible proposal, no? But not to Abelard, whose heart belonged to but one woman. He shot down Agaton's advances, and the spurned maid vengefully exposed Abelard's continued pursuit of Heloise to Fulbert. A woman rejected is an outrageous creature, Abelard wrote of the maid's tattling. Agaton's report threw Heloise's uncle into a fit of rage, rendering futile any attempt by Abelard to get back into his good graces. It seemed that the lovers had never been further apart. To complicate matters, Heloise was pregnant. Abelard, at the end of his rope, did the only sensible thing. He scaled the walls. Hey, Ollie, will you turn that down, please? Please? Hold up. Alright, I'm back. Alright, where was I? Oh yeah, Heloise was pregnant. Abelard, at the end of his rope, did the only sensible thing. He scaled the walls of Fulbert's house, abducted Heloise in a daring rescue, and whisked her away in the dead of night. He hid her in his hometown of Brittany, where she gave birth to their love child. Abelard, fearing a public scandal, began to have second thoughts. Perhaps he acted too hastily. Determined to ease tensions with her uncle, he proposed to marry Heloise. Astonishingly, Fulbert accepted the peace offering, and Abelard and Heloise were wed in a secret ceremony. Heloise was against their marriage, believing it to be no more than a business transaction that would drain the relationship of its natural passion. I completely agree with that. Will it not be more agreeable to me to see myself your mistress than your wife? She said, adding that the cries of children and the cares of a family are utterly inconsistent with the tranquility which study require. This was partially true. Abelard had been neglecting his philosophical studies while playing house. He reluctantly consented to his wife's demands and shipped her off to a convent for safekeeping. Their son ended up in the care of Heloise's sister. What occurred next was an event that historians have delicately described as a certain well enough known event when Abelard was not well treated. A certain well enough known event when Abelard, whatever. When Fulbert found out that his niece had been sent away to the convent, he had Abelard castrated. With chilling detachment, Abelard, pun intended, I'm certain of it, Abelard wrote, an assassin came into my bedchamber by night with a razor in his hand and found me in a deep sleep. I suffered the most shameful punishment that the revenge of an enemy could invent. In short, without losing my life, I lost my manhood. In one of the most remarkable examples of positive thinking ever recorded, Abelard envisioned the castration as a liberation from his past debauchery. He found solace in a monastery where he was finally able to write to his heart's content. I found in philosophy and religion a remedy for my disgrace. I searched out an asylum to secure me from love. Heloise wrote often to her estranged husband, and their amorous exchanges have become a legend in their own right. I cannot live if you will not tell me that you still love me, she wrote in one letter, adding that she loved him as a person and not as a man. Castration be damned. As their correspondence progressed over the years, Abelard's tone transformed from that of a lover to that of a priest. In one of his final letters to Heloise, he urged her to devote herself to Christ and forget about her wounded lover. You will hereafter apply yourself in good earnest to the business of your salvation. This ought to be your whole concern. Banish me, therefore, forever from your heart. Abelard continued his studies, eventually founding the abbey of the Paraclete Monastery. Heloise, however, refused to banish Abelard from her heart. She outlived him by 22 years and is buried beside him in Abbey's graveyard. Ha! She didn't give up. Whatever. Anyway, in his own words, we make a great couplet. Abelard's clandestine love affair with his student wreaked havoc upon his own study habits. Instead of reading and writing philosophy, he devoted his time to composing amorous poetry. Amazingly, he proved to be a poet of unusual talent, but by simply reciting Abelard's poetry, young men were able to obtain favors from young ladies. As the part-time laureate explained, those who were in love as I was took a pride in learning my poems, and by luckily applying my thoughts in verses, they obtained favors which perhaps they would not otherwise have gained. Fortunately for chaste young ladies everywhere, his poetry is long since lost. Damn. Alright. Louis Althusser. From 1918 to 1990. The trouble is where the bodies and we're still. The trouble is there are bodies and we're still sexual organs. And here's the face that goes with that quote. Okay. Louis Althusser was a 30-year-old virgin when he met the 38-year-old Helene Rittmann. The older woman introduced the French philosopher to a brave new sexual world, a world that Althusser may not have been ready for. After sleeping with Helene for the first time, Althusser was so mentally disturbed that he fell into a deep depression, requiring shock treatment and hospitalization. Despite the bad omens, this fool found himself a succubus, Despite the bad omens, Althusser eventually accepted sex as a part of his life and married Helene. In fact, Helene may have taught her young lover too well. He quickly began cheating on her with other women. Their marriage was punctuated by violent fights, and Helene frequently threatened to kill herself. That they had no close friends only compounded their marital woes. None of this helped Althusser's fragile mental state. He required frequent hospitalizations and extensive psychoanalytic treatments. Astonishingly, Althusser was still able to teach throughout his troubles. He lectured for more than 30 years at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, influencing an entire generation of French thinkers with his radical Marxist philosophy. Althusser's life came crashing down on him when, in the early hours of a quiet Sunday morning in 1980, he accidentally murdered his wife. As Althusser wrote with disturbing clarity, kneeling beside her, leaning across her body, I was massaging her neck. I would often silently massage the nape of her neck and her back, but on this occasion, I was massaging the front of her neck. Helene's face was calm and motionless. Her eyes were open and staring at the ceiling. Suddenly, I was terror-struck. Her eyes stared interminably, and I noticed the tip of her tongue was showing between her teeth and lips. Strange and still. I'd seen dead bodies before, of course, but never in my life looked into the face of someone who had been strangled. Yet I knew she had been strangled. But how? I stood up and screamed, "I've strangled Helene." He claimed that he was suffering from an acute state of mental confusion stemming from years of manic depression. He was subsequently judged mentally unfit to stand trial and spent almost 3 years institutionalized in the psychiatric hospitals before being released back into society in 1982. 3 years, guys. That's how valued a woman's life was in 1982. Okay. He lived in and out of hospitals until his death 8 years later, somehow finding the time and sanity to complete his autobiography, The Future Lasts Forever. In his own words, surprise. I have also, I think, learned what it is to love. Being thoughtful in relation to others, respecting their desires, their rhythms, never demanding things, but learning to receive and to accept every gift as a surprise, and being capable in a wholly unassuming way of giving and of surprising the other person without the least coercion. Althusser wrote, his wife was undoubtedly surprised when she woke to find herself being strangled to death by her own husband. St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay, I actually had this fool on a prayer candle for a while. Love takes up where knowledge leaves off. And that was a direct quote from him. He lived from 1225 to 1274. Thomas Aquinas was not an average teenage rebel. At age 17, he ran away from his Italian home to join a religious order. His family wanted him to become a Benedictine monk. Aquinas wanted to join the Order of St. Dominic, a rival Christian faction. While he was en route to the Order of St. Dominic in Rome, two of his brothers kidnapped him and locked him in a cell at the castle of Monte San Giovanni, an imposing fortress that doubled as his father's home. If anything could break young Aquinas' faith, his family reasoned it would be locked down in a castle. Despite being imprisoned, Aquinas refused to renounce his devotion to the Dominicans. In a desperate ploy, his family hired a prostitute to seduce him. They prayed that once Aquinas had sinned with the woman, he would give up his clerical aspirations. Recognizing the woman's amorous intentions the moment she was thrown into his cell, Aquinas drove her away with a hot firebrand. He begged God for the strength to carry on in the face of further temptations of the flesh. That night, God answered him in the form of two angels. While the angels did not help him escape, they did him one better. They tied a white cord around his waist. Thomas, on God's behalf, we gird you with the cincture of chastity, which no attack will ever destroy. The angels sang in harmony. With the power bestowed upon his loin by the magical rope, Aquinas was able to endure his captivity with a renewed sense of faith. Finally, after 2 years of imprisonment, Aquinas escaped. His family made no attempts to recapture him. He joined the Order of St. Dominic and became a priest of the Roman Catholic Church. Today, Aquinas is widely considered the greatest Catholic theologian, and that rope tied around his waist, Aquinas wore it until his death and bragged that he was never tempted to break his vow of chastity. In his own words, for unlawful carnal knowledge. Aquinas believed that some sins, such as adultery, are punishable on both physical and spiritual levels. Adultery is not only the fleshly sin of lust, but the spiritual sin of injustice, and that of a graver sort than simple theft. Aquinas wrote in his Summary of Theology, he was obviously unaware of the legal concept of double jeopardy, which forbids being tried more than once for the same infraction. So, that was funny. Alright, so that's what we have for Thomas Aquinas. Which, there's something to be said about that, though. That is pretty honorable. That, he stood his ground, and, he knew his destiny, and he stuck to it, and I think that's pretty honorable. Aristotle, my boy, we all know this face. Alright, we should all know this face, right? We know this face? Yeah, we know this face. Alright. He lived from 384 to 322 BC. How doth love show its greatest force? By making the fool to become wise, or the wise to become the fool. Or a fool, sorry. That's fair. Aristotle has taken plenty of abuse over the years for his misogynistic views, as he has deserved. The Greek philosopher believed that women are inherently defective creatures, based in part upon his erroneous observation that females have colder blood, fewer teeth, and shorter lives than men. which is actually not true, but, whatever. To Aristotle, women were monstrosities of nature and little more than tamed animals. Alright, I'm gonna whoop that ass. That's what's gonna happen. Many historians simply ignore his views of women. After all, he was, along with Plato and Socrates, one of the founding fathers of Western philosophy. Aristotle created the first formal study of logic and advanced the fields of biology, ethics, and politics. When he was 37, Aristotle married 18-year-old Pythias, adoptive daughter of his mentor Hermes, and their ages corresponded exactly with the optimal ages to marry. Aristotle romantically pointed out. The historical record indicates that their marriage was a happy one. If his wife had been allowed to record her own thoughts on their relationship, a different picture may very well have emerged. Did she really enjoy being treated as a tamed animal and called a monstrosity? Pythias died at an early age, leaving Aristotle to raise their only child, a daughter also named Pythias. Aristotle next married a woman with the unbecoming name of Hercules. Sorry. Few details of their relationship remain, and when Aristotle died, he requested that he be buried beside his first wife. He continued to treat women like livestock to the very end. He left Hercules to the executors of his estate, with explicit instructions in his will that she be given to one not unworthy, if she wished to remarry. In his own words, of mouths and men. Critics have ridiculed Aristotle for centuries for his belief that women have fewer teeth than men. Although he was twice married, it never occurred to him to verify this statement by examining his wife's mouths. Philosopher Bertrand Russell wrote, "Perhaps he was too busy with his work to find time to check." According to Diogenes the Cynic, I love Diogenes, that's my boy. Okay, Aristotle would walk up and down a public walkway in Lyceum, discussing philosophy with his pupil until it was time to rub themselves with oil. Women were confined to the home and barred from public social functions, while Greek men were free to teach, learn, and rub each other down. So he was very gay. Okay, let's be real about what that means. He was very gay. He just wanted to oil down men. He did not care about women. St. Augustine of Hippo. This is this guy. Very pointy hat. Okay. Give me chastity and continence, but not yet. Okay, that's fair. He's like, I want that, just next life. When Augustine left his North African home at the age of 16 to study in Carthage, an ancient city in present-day Tunisia, he partied as if he was the first student to ever discover wine, women, and song. Alright, so he a playboy. He neglected his homework to instead focus on the hellish pleasures, the most documented of which was a sexual relationship he had with a young woman whose name is unknown to us today. He wrote, "It was a sweet thing to me, both to love and to be loved, and more sweet still when I was able to enjoy the body of my lover. And so I muddied the clear spring of friendship with the dirt of physical desire, and clouded over its brightness with the dark hell of lust." Augustine remained together with the unnamed woman for 13 years. They had a son, Adeodatus. I don't know. I'm certain I'm saying that name right. And Augustine supported his makeshift family by teaching rhetoric. They lived a quiet, simple life, but Augustine's mother had bigger dreams for her son. As Augustine approached 30, his mother pressured him to marry a respectable woman. Not the kind of girl who would have a child out of wedlock. The woman whom he lived with, the love of his life by his own accord, left town at Augustine's behest. Although he retained custody of their son, Augustine was nevertheless devastated. My heart, which clung to her, was broken and wounded and dripping blood, he wrote. The new respectable woman his mother set him up with was only 10 years old, and she would be ineligible to marry for another 2 years. Augustine needed to sate his appetite for female companionship in the meantime. Yet his former lover was now a continent away, exiled to Africa. He had no reservations about moving on. The man whose heart was broken and wounded and dripping blood decided to take a mistress. As he later recalled, he was in love with being in love. Before he could be married, and while he was still seeing his new mistress, Augustine had an honest-to-God divine intervention that would forever change his life. One day, while hanging out with a friend, a mysterious voice in his head shouted at him, "Augustine, Augustine, take up the Bible and read." He happened to have just a good book handy, or just such a book handy, such a good book, oh my god, words. He happened to have just such a good book handy. He picked it up. The first passage that he read was Romans 13:13 through 14. Take part not in revelry or in drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness. Okay, whatever. Don't do that. Not in quarreling and jealousy. But put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for flesh to gratify its desires. After reading this passage, Augustine committed himself to a life of celibacy, abandoning both his mistress and his fiancée in the process. He converted to Catholicism and became a priest in Hippolytus, now an Algerian city called Annaba. Annaba? Yeah. He confronted his past lasciviousness in his groundbreaking autobiography, Confessions. Augustine's frank recollections of his premarital sexual experiences were considered revolutionary at the time, but he had more in mind than mere titillation. I intend to remind myself of my past foulness and carnal corruptions, not because I love them, but so that I may love you, my God, he wrote. Augustine of Hippo would go on to write more than 100 books, shaping the development of Western thinking with his biblical interpretations of marriage and sexuality. In his own words, can't live with him, can't live without him. Unlike many other theologians, Augustine was able to draw upon his own pre-celibate experiences when writing about sexuality. He understood, for instance, that men's sexual organs had minds of their own. The penis may become erect at inopportune moments or fail to rise to the occasion. At times, without intention, the body stirs on its own, insistent, and at other times it leaves a straining lover in the lurch. And while desire sizzles in the imagination, it is frozen in the flesh. He wrote in City of God. Simone de Beauvoir. Beauvoir. Okay, Simone de Beauvoir. Okay, I need to learn some French so I can get better at this. 1908 to 1986. To catch a husband is an art. To hold him is a job. Facts. Even as a teenager, French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir knew that she was different than other women. I can't get rid of this idea that I'm alone in a world apart, being present at the other as a spectacle, she wrote. When she went to secondary school to study philosophy, her otherness was more pronounced. Beauvoir smoked and drank like a man. Same. She attracted the attention of a fellow student, Renee Mahieu, who wrote in her diary, that the good-looking and intelligent Mahieu was her greatest happiness. Mahieu named her Le Castor, French for the beaver, the vagina. Okay. He was perfect for her in every way except one. He was married. Meanwhile, she studied for her teaching exam with the Mahieus' friend Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre was an ugly duckling, but a charming conversationalist compared to the handsome yet dull Mahieu. Beauvoir and Sartre studied and talked day and night for weeks. She finished in second place on the exam. He finished first, although it was his second attempt after failing the year prior. The more time that Beauvoir spent with Sartre, the less she thought about Mahieu, and to her astonishment, she found herself in love with the funny-looking man. It was the beginning of the unconventional 51-year relationship that would dominate Beauvoir's life and threaten to overshadow her work. Although they often referred to each other as husband and wife in letters, Beauvoir and Sartre never married. Marriage was a dirty word for the free-thinking Sartre. Beauvoir was conflicted at first. She had always imagined herself as a wife and a mother. Instead, Sartre proposed an open arrangement wherein their relationship with each other would be essential and all others secondary. Beauvoir and Sartre lived together only sporadically and thus had plenty of time for extracurricular activities, both sexual and intellectual. In the 1950s, Beauvoir wrote the influential feminist polemic, The Second Sex. She was also a gifted novelist and memoirist, establishing herself as a philosopher independent of Sartre. At his urging, they disclosed their sexual affairs to each other. Two collections of letters published after both of their deaths revealed their promiscuity. Beauvoir recounted her same-sex liaisons in tantalizing detail for Sartre, while he wrote to her about taking young girls' virginity with clinical precision. Occasionally, they pursued the same women, frequently with disturbing duplicity, comparing notes behind their conquest back. Beauvoir's most passionate relationship was not with Sartre, but with an American author, Nelson Algren. They first met in February 1947 while Beauvoir was visiting Chicago. Algren gave her a ring and asked her to move to America to be with him. "I'm ready to marry you this very moment," he said. Beauvoir, though deeply in love with Algren, was still under Sartre's thumb. "I could not love you, want you, and miss you more than I do," she wrote to Algren from France. "But for nearly 20 years, Sartre did everything for me. He helped me to live, to find myself. He sacrificed lots of things for my sake. I could not desert him and pledge my life to somebody else." Algren grudgingly accepted her explanation and continued to see Beauvoir, and when they could find the time and means to rendezvous, unaware that she was still sleeping with Sartre, among others. Algren was understandably infuriated when he read an extract from Beauvoir's memoir, Force of Circumstance, in which she called her relationship with Algren a passing sexual liaison. Algren wrote a scathing review of her book in Harper's. "Pimps are more honest than philosophers," he quipped, driving the nail into the coffin of their relationship. Still, she wore the ring that he'd given her until death. Meanwhile, Sartre adopted his Algerian mistress, Arlette Elkaïm, as his daughter in 1965. Neither he nor Beauvoir ever had any children of their own, and the adoption was a legal necessity to ensure the sanctity of his literary legacy. El-Qaim was named the executor of Sartre's estate upon his death in 1980. Not to be outdone, Beauvoir adopted one of her own lovers, Sylvie Le Bon, as her daughter after Sartre passed away, and named Le Bon the executor of her estate. Despite the uncommon nature of their romance, Beauvoir and Sartre are forever linked by virtue of being buried together in a shared grave in Paris. There is one thing that hasn't changed and cannot change. That is that no matter what happens and what I become, I will become it with you, Sartre once wrote to Beauvoir. The comradeship that we welded our lives together made a superfluous mockery of any other bond we might have forged for ourselves, Beauvoir said, in her own words, separate but equal. There will always be certain differences between man and woman, her eroticism, and therefore her sexual world have a special form of their own, and therefore cannot fail to engender a sensuality, a sensitivity of a special nature. This means that her relations to her own body, to that of the male, to the child, will never be identical with those the male bears to his own body, to that of the female, and to the child. Henry Ward Beecher, 1813 to 1887. Marriage is the grave of love. Facts. At the time that Henry Ward Beecher was accused of adultery, he was the most famous minister in America. His heartfelt sermons were a sharp break from the fire and brimstone, Old Testament-based rhetoric of the time. Beecher's signature, Gospel of Love, philosophy taught that Christ's love was unconditional, a cutting-edge theory in 19th century America. Thousands of people flocked to hear him speak at the Plymouth Church every Sunday. While his wife Eunice was giving birth to and raising their 10 children, Beecher was busy as well. The charismatic preacher had been dogged by unproven rumors of sexual philandering throughout his career, including liaisons with poet Edna Dean, proctor and neighbor Chloe Beach, the latter reportedly giving birth to Beecher's illegitimate child. The affair that would prove to be his downfall, however, was with his parishioner, Elizabeth Tilton. Elizabeth was the wife of Beecher's good friend, Theodore Tilton. Their dalliance allegedly began in October 1868, when Mrs. Tilton surrendered to Beecher's advances. After a long moral resistance, Beecher convinced her that their love was pure, and that she remained spotless and chaste in God's eyes. Spotless and chaste in God's eyes. This was, of course, pure bullshit. The Bible that Beecher read from every Sunday made no provisions for purity of love when it came to condemning adultery. Still, his sweet nothings worked on her, at least for a while. Mrs. Tilton confessed her sins to her husband in 1870. Although Theodore forgave Beecher, he was unable to keep the affair a secret. Spouses aside, not everyone who learned of the affair was disappointed. Women's rights advocate Victoria Woodhull was a leader of the free love movement. Free lovers sought to liberate women from the sexual slavery of loveless marriages, and they were heavily criticized by religious leaders of the day, including by Beecher. To Woodhull's ears, Beecher's sexcapades sounded suspiciously like the actions of a closeted free lover, not those of a preacher upholding the integrity of the social institution of marriage. In fact, Woodhull had it on good authority that Beecher had once privately called marriage the grave of love, Evidence of his affair was exactly the ammunition that the free lovers needed to take the moral high ground in the public debate over women's rights. Woodhull publicized Beecher's frolicking in a newspaper story in October 1872, hoping to expose the minister as a hypocrite. Bedlam ensued. Mrs. Tilton retracted her side of the story, stating that she had not slept with the minister. She separated from her husband, but not due to adultery, she insisted. Beecher was exonerated at an inquiry by the Plymouth Church. Mrs. Tilton was excommunicated from the same church. Theodore Tilton, retracting his forgiveness, sued Beecher in a civil court for engaging in criminal conversation with his wife. Adultery was a crime in 19th century America. The 6-month trial enthralled the public, who unanimously declared it the greatest scandal of the 1800s. Beecher refused to lay his hand on the Bible or swear under oath before taking the stand. His contradictory, rambling testimony convinced his flock and 3 of the 12 jurors that he was guilty. But the trial ended in a hung jury. Eunice Beecher never left her husband's side, even when 3 years later Mrs. Tilton publicly admitted that she had, in fact, slept with Beecher. The beleaguered minister fell out of favor with the public, due largely in part to the scandal, and died of a stroke on March 8, 1887. And despite all of the hand-wringing, the institution of marriage in the Christian religion survived both the free love movement and the freely loving antics of Henry Ward Beecher. In his own words, Beecher did a bad thing. In love, the freshness and charm of youth have caught men's attention, and they have pronounced the first love best, but it is the poorest. One does not know how to love till he has felt the discipline of life. Young love is a flame, very pretty, often very hot and fierce, but still only light and flickering. The love of the older and disciplined heart is as coals, deep, burning, unquenchable. Beecher wrote, exactly how disciplined his adulterous heart was is questionable, but it definitely appears to have been unquenchable. He thirsty. John Calvin, 1509 to 1564. Here's this guy. Alright then. The veil of holy marriage allows husband and wife to give each other delight. Perhaps no theologian has done more to shape our current Western views on love, marriage, and family than John Calvin. The influential French pastor helped to lead society out of the Dark Ages by redefining the roles of husbands and wives and introducing new divorce guidelines that allowed men and women alike to sue for custody and alimony. So here's the guy I'm mad at. Okay, cool. Calvin was 30 years old by the time he began to seriously contemplate marriage for himself. Still at an early stage in his clerical career, he viewed wives as little more than glorified housekeepers. I've never taken a wife, Calvin wrote, and I do not know if I shall ever marry. If I did so, it would be to free myself from trivial worries so that I could devote myself to the Lord. His friends encouraged him to seek a companion. He laid out his ground rules for such a union, writing, I am none of those insane lovers who embrace even vices. And once they have been overcome by a fine figure, the only beauty that attracts me is this: if she is modest, accommodating, not haughty, frugal, patient, and there's hope. She will be concerned about my health. He asked for a lot, considering he ain't that much to start with. Just saying. In early 1540, One of Calvin's supporters introduced him to a young German woman from a noble family who was looking for a housekeeper wife. Okay, so housekeeper was like crossed off. Wait, can you see it? Over here. See, it's like crossed off and then replaced with wife. But Pierce, who was looking for a housekeeper and got a wife, with whom he could. Oh, a house. My dumbass. It just said. Okay, yeah. So he was looking for a housekeeper, but kind of a wife, whom he could converse with, and foresaw communication problems with a German-speaking girl. He did not want to hurt her feelings. He grudgingly agreed to the wedding on the condition that she learned to speak French. Her family began planning a wedding for that spring. At the same time, Calvin dispatched his brother with the instructions to find a more suitable marriage candidate quickly. His brother's search was ultimately a failure. It is obvious that Calvin had little confidence that his fiancée would be able to learn French, and she apparently never did, as the wedding date came and went without any wedding bells. Later that year, Calvin found a more agreeable marriage prospect in Idelette de Beer, a widowed member of his congregation. This new woman had experience running a household and had 2 children from her previous marriage. Practically a family starter kit in Calvin's eyes. Most importantly, she spoke his language. This time, Calvin went through with the nuptials. Their first few weeks as a married couple were spent in bed, sick. Calvin believed that this was a warning from God not to enjoy the married life too fervently. Hold on, I'll look.
But he's fake sleeping. I saw him blink.
Oh. Although he had no moral qualms about others enjoying marriage, see, in his own words, despite the omen of their initial mutual illness, Calvin looked forward to having children of his own with Burr. That's her last name. Burr. Burr. Okay, sadly, their only child together did not survive infancy. Calvin was stoic about the tragedy, writing, "The Lord has given me a son, but he has also taken him away." Their marriage was otherwise uneventful. After Idelette passed away in 1549, Calvin did not remarry. In his own words, "Ain't no shame." Unlike other biblical scholars of the Middle Ages, Calvin's views on sex were mostly positive. He believed that celibacy was not part of God's plan. It is tempting God to strive against the nature imparted by him and to despise his present gifts as if they did not belong to us all. Enjoying sex within marriage is a good thing. Whatever sin or shame is in it, he wrote, is so covered by the goodness of marriage that it ceases to be sin, or at least to be so regarded by God, for the intercourse of husband and wife is a pure thing, good and holy. Amen. Albert Camus, 1913 to 1960. Blessed are, yeah?
But Mom, when people talk about sex, they say that unholy activities are happening in that room.
Well, you see, according to like older people or older mindsets or whatever, older cultures, they once believed that if you had sex outside of being married, then you were automatically bad or immoral, right? But in our society, it's not necessarily the same. You're not going to get the same kind of like shame for it. But it's still, according to religious people, that, like, whatever happens in the marriage bed is okay because it's sanctified, But, that is if you believe such things,
Yeah.
I don't believe that, a creator of the universe would care so much about our dinglings. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
But, and what we do with them.
And I do not approve of something called a sex friend.
Yeah?
I feel like that's just straight up disgusting.
Well, you're 10 years old, and, you know, I feel like someday you might learn a bit more about life. And kind of build perceptions around that based on your experience. But anyway, do you have any more questions, Ollie?
I have one last one.
All right, what's the last question?
Okay. So so say you cheat on your boyfriend, then they go on the "You're Not on the Father" game show, and the guy who is not the father is holding the baby, but then he's like, "You are not the father," and he's all excited, and she runs off, but then the guy just chucks the baby in the far side of the corner. Would that be legal?
No, and that is a very outlandish circumstance that I hope never happens.
It has happened very much, a lot of times.
Alright, well, I'm reading a book. Let's get back to this, okay? Albert Camus, 1913 to 1960. Here's the face with the quote I'm about to say. Blessed are the hearts that bend. They shall never be broken. Ooh, I like that one. I like that. Alright. French Algerian Albert Camus is most closely associated with the philosophy of the absurd. Since death is inevitable, life is meaningless. Only this realization, he believed, can lead one to making the most of the here and now, and living life to the fullest. Humanity should stop trying to impose order and meaning on an irrational universe. Such a position did not lend itself well to romance. Nevertheless, Camus was not immune. As he wrote, love is the kind of illness that does not spare the intelligent or the dull. Facts. He married his first wife, Simone Simone Hiei, in 1934. They were both young, and
Mom,
Camus...
I have one last question.
Yeah?
If someone gets married to someone, they get a divorce, but then they get back together, are they technically still married?
No, because they got a divorce.
So would they have to get married again?
I mean, I don't believe in marriage. I don't think that marriage is a great idea in the first place. I believe in, soul bonding, things like that, and staying together forever, but I don't believe in actually involving the government in your relationship. I think that's stupid. As somebody who is married. But yeah, anyway. So, they were both young. Well, I mean, marriage isn't stupid. I think the concept of involving the government in your marriage is stupid. How about that? Let me make sure I have clarity on that.
Just make sure people don't get offended.
Yeah. You know. Alright.
People will be like, are you making fun of our marriage? Are you saying that we should have never gotten married and all that?
No, I think that they should take it more seriously. And by taking it more seriously, it means, like, investing in more than just the one day. Invest in the relationship, you know? That's a whole different thing. We're reading books. He married his first wife, Simone Hiei, in 1934, and they were both young. And Camus quickly came to believe that their union was a mistake, especially because Hiei was a morphine addict and Camus was averse to drug use. Their marriage ended when Camus found out that his wife was having sex with a doctor in exchange for morphine. His divorce likely influenced the dark views on romantic love. This line from his 1942 novel, The Stranger, suggests attraction, marriage, and fidelity become synonyms for bondage. 3 months after his divorce was finalized, Camus married mathematician Francine Barre. Barre? Okay, I think I got that. Her sister thought that Camus's ears protruded like a monkey's. Ferre was in love and unfazed. The monkey is the animal closest to the man, she responded. Both Ferre and her monkey strayed. Unpublished letters revealed that she had a clandestine affair with the actress Maria Casares, while Camus pursued countless women behind his wife's back. In regard to Camus's extramarital affairs, biographer Olivier Todd said that I did not write a book about Albert Camus's love life. Even a telephone directory wouldn't have been long enough for that. Camus remained wed to his second wife until he was killed in a car crash in 1960 at the age of 46. In his own words, "It's not you, it's me." Camus held his lovers at a distance. "All my life, when someone has become attached to me, I've done everything to make them back off," he wrote in a letter. In another letter, he complained that he had no gift for love. One of the characters in his novel, Caligula, voiced an opinion that could be construed as that of its author. "To love someone means to be willing to age with that person. I am not capable of such love." Ooh, that one kind of smacked though. I'm not gonna lie, that hit me in the chest when I said that. I kind of felt that a little bit. Nicholas Chamfort, 1741 to 1794. The world either breaks or hardens the heart. And here's the face with that quote. It's got a chin for radio. Probably should get the beard on that. No, I'm just kidding. I shouldn't joke. When the principal of his Parisian school suggested that he become a priest, Sebastian Roch Nicolas quipped, "I'll never be a priest. I'm too fond of sleep, philosophy, women, honor, and real fame." In his late teens and early 20s, Nicholas blossomed as a playwright. He changed his name to Nicholas Chamfort to mask his peasant roots and shaved 2 years off his age to play up his role as a Wunderkind. The studious and studly Chamfort rumpled the bed sheets of beautiful actresses and noblewomen, his stamina in the bedroom earning him the nickname Hercules. For a while, he lived out his fanciful dream of sleep, philosophy, women, honor, and fame. Then, at the age of 25, he lost everything. An unknown, possibly venereal disease struck Chamfort, leaving him unable to read, write, or even walk for several months. The mysterious ailment afflicted every part of his body, from his nervous system to his digestive system. When he recovered from the illness, the playful, confident young man who had been the talk of the town was gone forever. A fire-breathing pessimist emerged from the ashes. The reason for his change in attitude was readily apparent. The illness had permanently scarred his good looks and more horrifically disfigured his genitals, a devastating blow to a man who had previously placed such a high value on physical relationships. Chamfort was forced to contemplate how he had been living his life, and he did not like what he found. The moment when youthful illusions and passions are shattered often provokes sorrow, but sometimes we come to hate the glamour which deceived us. Love to this point in life had been nothing more than the contact of skins. The illness forced his heart into a state of exile, and 15 years passed before he finally experienced the depths of true love. With 53-year-old widow Martha Buffon, there existed something more and better than love between us, since there was complete union on the level of ideas, feelings, and attitudes. Shaffer later wrote about their romance. Unfortunately, his deformed member likely muted their sexual relationship. In 1782, Shaffer and Buffon moved to the country where they found true happiness together. Shaffer loved Buffon as ardently as a mistress, as tenderly as his mother. According to fellow writer Noël Aubin, after just 6 months in the country, Buffon fell ill and died in her lover's arms. His happiness shattered again. Shaffer returned to Paris. Hey, Ollie, can you turn that down, bud? Please and thank you. He made one last-ditch attempt at romance with Julie Carew, a 22-year-old dancer. Shaffer was smitten by a terrible fever of love that had sparked in him without the least intention of doing so. Julie wrote, rejected, Shaffer gave up on love and resigned himself to his work for the final 10 years of his life. In 1793, faced with imprisonment over sarcastic remarks he had made against government officials, Shaffer attempted to commit suicide. Living is a disease from the pains of which sleep eases us every 16 hours. Sleep is but a palliative, death alone is a cure, he wrote, in his own words, in 140 characters or less. Aphorisms are short, cynical witticisms drawn from personal experience. Nicholas Shaffer was the undisputed master of the 17th and 18th century art form. Here are some of his greatest hits. One must make the choice between loving women and knowing them. There is no middle course. Love resembles epidemic diseases. The more one fears them, the more liable is one to infection. Marriage follows on love as smoke on flame. Love gives greater pleasure than marriage, for the same reason that romance novels are more amusing than history books. Auguste Comte. That's that face. Gloomy and painful as celibacy is, a bad marriage is much worse. When Augustin Comte left his house for an evening stroll on May 3rd, 1821, he did not expect to meet his future wife. The French philosopher's self-described lack of charm and beauty was of no help with the opposite sex, so he hoped only to pick up a lady of the night, strike up a temporary business relationship, and head home to finish some writing. He met Caroline Masson, a prostitute of uncommon charm. For the next 6 months, they saw each other whenever he could afford it. According to biographer Mary Pickering, Comte stopped visiting Masson after an old girlfriend popped back into his life in the fall of 1821. A year later, he ran into Masson again. She had retired from her lucrative line of work and now ran a reading room. They struck up a more conventional friendship this time. Comte offered mathematics lessons to help her with bookkeeping for her new business. However, she had no inclination for legitimate work and sold her business after a short time. Planning to move in with a wealthy businessman who had promised to support her, when the businessman changed his mind, she was faced with a return to life on the streets, unless perhaps Comte would take her in. He consented, but admitted to being a little tormented over the decision. Although he was once again single, he could not see himself in a normal relationship with her, and was adamant about keeping his hands off his new housemate. As a former prostitute, Masson was required to undergo bi-weekly medical examinations. There was only one way to escape the exams and erase her name from the registry of working girls: marriage. Comte, angry at authorities and at the same time touched by her trust in him, agreed to marry her. They were wed on February 19th, 1825, in the town hall. After less than 2 tense years of marriage, Comte had a nervous breakdown that left him unable to write or teach. He spent his time alternately lying in bed and crouching behind doors like an animal. When his wife tried to intervene, Comte threw knives at her. His sanity came and went over the next year. Unable to pull himself together, he jumped off a bridge. A royal guard fished him out of the water. Comte made an almost miraculous recovery thanks to his wife's care, who, luckily for Comte, had not been frightened away by the flying knives. 13 years later, their marriage was still on shaky ground. Comte and Masson were sleeping in separate bedrooms. I've always thought that all that is lost between us should make what may remain more precious to us, Masson wrote to her husband in 1839, hinting at the possibility of reunion. She wanted to rekindle their very deep friendship because he still occupied in her heart a place that could never be taken by anyone else. However, Comte wished only to be alone and tranquil. He believed that he would have completed his masterwork course in 8 years instead of 12 without his wife in the picture. He seemed to agree, writing, "A man is not only in this world to write volumes on behalf of posterity, and if there had been less science at home, there would have been far more happiness. In all, there was so much science and so little happiness that they separated 4 times in 1826, 1833, 1838, and 1842. After being berated by her husband for interrupting his work for the last time, she packed her bags for good. Divorce was illegal at that time, but Comte had paid his wife 3,000 francs a year so that he could live in peace. Perhaps their relationship had carried on far longer than it had any right to. She was a brash and opinionated former owner of 2 businesses and refused to bow to her husband. My great crime was to see you in a husband, was to see in you a husband, not a master. Really, I did not know how to be submissive, but even so, I did love you," she wrote to her husband. She went on to be a governess while her husband continued his studies unabated. He pioneered the study of human social activity, coining the word sociology to describe his newly minted scientific field. But for all the progress that Comte made in his work, he never successfully scrutinized the relationship in his own life. To the bitter end, he maintained that Caroline was the sole irreparable mistake in his life. Unable to establish a truly loving relationship with his family or wife, Comte finally chose to find gratification in a love for humanity. Pickering wrote of Comte's ironic fate as an expert in social relations. In his own words, Comte's strange gospel. For most intellectuals, founding a brand new scientific field would be a legacy not for Comte, who also started his own religion. After splitting from his wife, he became obsessed with another woman, Clotilde de Vaux. Clotilde de Vaux. I'm sure I'm saying that right. Though they were not lovers, their intense friendship resulted in the foundations of a new secular religion, positivism, a scientifically based religious movement through which they intended to advance intellectual thought in a post-Enlightenment society. Comte rechristened his new friend Saint Clotilde in his manuscripts after she died in 1846. The positivism movement carried on without its patron saint. For his new religion, Comte copied Catholicism's most popular aspects. Why mess with such success? Thus, the Holy Trinity was rebranded as the Positivist Trilogy. the great being, the great medium, and the great fetish. He even proposed a new calendar for his religion. Comte had thought of everything except for one key aspect: followers. Though his religion failed to catch on with more than a handful of hardcore devotees, it paved the way for the spread of secular humanist organizations in the 19th century. Alright, guys. I'm going to take a little break, and then we're going to get on some René Descartes. I shouldn't leave books open like that. I always do that, and then they never want to close.
Hey, can I tell you guys something?
Oh, you want to tell us all something?
I want to tell everyone a cool fact about a long time ago in the medieval ages.
Ooh, tell me.
You know torture?
Not personally, yes.
But there's a torture they called flay. You know what that is?
Where they fillet them?
It's where they grab a knife and they'll smoothly cut off their skin.
Yeah, that's pretty messed up.
Yep, and they would only cut off certain places, like in the gut and stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty messed
They'd
up.
only go for where most organs are.
I'm glad that we're not there in that time. All right, we're taking a break. I'll be back.